Working Cows Podcast, episode 271. This episode is brought to you by Mystic Lubricants. For a look at their full range of top quality products, visit mysticlubes.com.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, powered by the Global Ag Network, and this episode is brought to you by Mystic Lubricants.
Since 1922, Mystic Lubricants has been providing superior performance and protection for farmers who demand the most out of their equipment. Today, Mystic continues to develop products in real-world conditions that are specially formulated to meet the unique demands of your specialized machines. They provide advanced protection for engine longevity and are the choice of people who make a living working the land. Learn more about Mystic products at mysticlubes.com. That's MYSTIK lubes.com.
Very excited to be joined once again by Ray Marxer. Ray, of course, is the former general manager of the Beaverhead Ranch, large ranch in southwest Montana owned by the Koch family. And also the author of a fantastic book that I would highly encourage you to get to stuff some stockings and get for yourself and just take in the information he's got in there. It's called Cowboy in a Corporate World, and he did a great job with the book, so very, very highly recommend you get your hands on that. And today I want to talk to Ray about employee retention, about how you find and keep great employees, and some of the things that he'd been through as an employee on the Beaverhead Ranch, and then he worked his way all the way up to, as I said, manager or general manager of his unit of Koch's ranching industry, which was all of what they had going on there in southwest Montana. And so he's got some experience as far as employees go, and they did some great work in increasing their employee retention over the years. And so I wanted to talk to him about lessons they learned and some of the things that they had going on there. So Ray, thanks for joining me today again on the Working Cows Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Really have, again, been appreciating your book. Was just listening to some of the chapters dealing with our topic for the day, prior to this interview, and just, again, well written, and appreciate it. And so hopefully it's on everybody's shelf by now, but I guess if not, it's still probably could still get your hands on a copy in time for Christmas, but would encourage people to go out and seek that out and find it. And today I wanted to talk to you kind of about the employment and employees and employee retention, and how you kind of oversaw some of the changes that led to greater employee retention. And I think maybe the best place to start is kind of the situation as it was when you started at the Beaverhead Ranch. Was it 1973?
1974, October 8th, 1974 is when I started. Yeah.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about what it was like working at the Beaverhead there, and some of the ways that you guys were kind of making do with what you had and getting by on maybe less than what we would expect these days.
So back in those days, as we look back on it now, our society would call it very primitive. And in some ways it was. I mean, but it's all relative in that I think back then to a lot of the crews, and the way the operations were, of course, was command-based, but a lot of the crews were made up of single men, big bunkhouses, cookhouses, single men. I recall when I went to work there as a married man in 74, I think I went to work at $400 a month. Plus we had a trailer house to live in. And I thought I was on top of the world. Everything was relative back then. A single man living in the bunkhouse was making $270 a month.
Hmm.
No, it was $210 a month plus room and board. And when I went to Sage Creek, I did get it boosted up. Within a year, they were getting $290 a month plus room and board, which, room and board then was a big portion of their compensation. So a lot of times if you had a good cook, they weren't getting cheated. They were getting their good value. If you had a bad cook, man, them guys were getting cheated, and nobody was happy. and typical, like with cookhouse bad, and we're talking single crews, so that was a reality. A cook is a pretty thankless job. It's hard work. So a lot of times the cook's mad, and if the cook isn't mad and doing good, then the crew's mad. So that was one of the tougher deals. But if you got a good cook that's there and feeding good meals, you have a pretty content crew. Yeah. So, but at any rate, back in those days, we didn't have much. You did everything. We didn't have trailers and stuff to maneuver around. Most of our travel back then, like for a cowboy crew, was literally, if you went on the road, it was almost 90 miles from one end of that place to the other. Of course, you were only in the upper reaches during the summer months. The winter months, it was a good place to be from. But we would, it was 40, 50 miles to the main summer camp from our headquarters. But if we had to move to camp, of course, we'd use our own vehicles or something to get there, and then set up camp in a pretty primitive spot where there wasn't electricity. No, we did have running water in a creek that went by, outhouse, no phone. But we trailed the horses everywhere. We did have one old stock truck, an old Ford stock truck, kind of a snub-nosed stock truck with a big rack, like an 18 or 20-foot bed and a rack where you could back up to a bank and raise the tailgate high enough to where you could jump horses in and out. We had that, and it was used some. And then the ranch had just gotten their first horse stock trailer that fall during the year before I came in 74. And it was 30 foot long, 3-axle, 6 foot tall, 5.5 wide. And all them horses that we had, they were mostly part draft horse. They had perch and studs on thoroughbred mares. So they're big horses. In my book, I mentioned that it was like loading a horse into a culvert. Them big horses. There were some horses we couldn't even put in it with a saddle on. They were that big. But at any rate, that trailer, when we did have that trailer and used it, they had a single cab pickup that pulled it. We didn't have a lot of pickups. I mean, you either rode somewhere or who could get in the truck cab and couldn't stand the cold, got in the truck cab. The rest of us rode in the back of the truck or in the nose of that trailer. And I remember a number of times that the nose of that trailer, man, that is cold. And the way it was built, it had a kind of a flop down door on the nose, to the horse compartment, but there was no other door in it. So if anybody was going to have to ride in the trailer, you had to get in before you loaded the horses. And then it'd be pretty dusty in there. So we had a few old horse blankets and slickers and stuff in there. And you just had to cover yourself up. The dust was so bad. But but most of the time, like moving from camp to camp, it was, 25, 30 miles. We just trailed horses.
Right.
That's just the way it was.
Yeah. And you trailed the cows and the horses along, kind of, yeah. Everything goes.
They had tried, there was a new fella that had kind of taken over, was trying to, out of our Wichita office. It was, his name was George Enlow. I never met him, but in 1968 he was there, and he built some of the big pens that we had. There was a small set of pens at the Jake cow camp in the Blacktail, and then he built a big set of shipping pens at the Sage Creek Ranch, which was 60 miles away, and then the Staudier pens in the Centennial Valley, which was 45, 50 miles away for the summer. And he built those pens, and then some at the 7L way up on the far end of the ranch. But in 1968, it was his idea that they weren't going to trail cows anymore. They were going to truck them all, pairs, to the Centennial and to Sage Creek. And I still recall that they did that 1 year. And then he wasn't there anymore, and they went back to trailing. They had like 300 bums that fall, because everything, it just wasn't set up. And you got big herds of cattle trying to go out, and you might have 600 pair, but you can only ship 200 that day, and you got to go out and make a cut in them and try and get them mothered, and it just wasn't set up very well. But the pens did serve a purpose in that they allowed us to wean in those locations, and we did ship the calves away from those locations every year, so that made it better for the whole process. And then we could turn those cows out in the fall, still in the summer country, for a while before they had to come home. So the calves didn't have to walk 50 miles both ways, and that helped. But it wasn't until 1976 that we got a crew cab pickup finally, and we started using the horse trailers. We got another small gooseneck trailer, stock trailer, for the Sage Creek Ranch, but it was so handy that I didn't get to see it for the first year. And we had a little 1-ton truck with the dualies on that was virtually worthless if there was a skiff of snow or rain. So most of the time we just rode. Right.
Yep. And so what was, if you remember, what was employee retention like back then? How long was the average guy on the crew, and some of those things?
6 months. It's kind of seasonal. A lot of those cowboys, they'd come maybe for calving and branding, and then you didn't need a whole that big a crew to go for the summer, so they'd cut the crew down, or maybe some of the married guys, because they didn't have living facilities in the summer places for many married people, and the facilities they did have were pretty primitive. So they'd be asked to work on the hay crew or something for the summer. Most cowboys didn't want to do that. They'd just go somewhere else. Sure. So the crews back then, not just because they were single, but because of the way things were, they were more transient. We'd have a few guys that would stay, key guys that would, and they were usually married guys that maybe their wife was a cook, that would stay on a little longer, but average tenure was probably under a year back then.
And how many people were working there back then?
Oh man, we'd have 14 or 15 guys seasonally on the cow crew in peak season, during calving and branding, and then there'd maybe be down to 6 or 8 during some of the summer months, pick back up a little bit in the fall for weaning and preg testing, and then back to the small crew for the winter. But overall, then we had a huge farm crew and feeding crew in the winter, and a pretty good sized one for haying in the summer too. So all in all, there was times where you'd have, if you counted the guys that ended up seasonal, but you would have kept them on as full time, there would have been 25 or 30 full timers, and then some years once we started switching our irrigation systems, there were some years where we would have 20 seasonal irrigators, in the summer too. So it was huge, and then as we transitioned, it was really tough. That was probably the toughest part, being either a foreman or cow foreman, and for sure for the manager too was managing a crew, finding a crew, and then keeping them long enough. And you really, there was quite a few people that were available then. There was a lot of people that were hands. They were still hands. They could get a lot accomplished. They weren't afraid of hard work, and so there was quite a few more available. And then also about that time too, for some of the crews, there was a lot more people available because the sheep industry had kind of started and really dramatically declined. And so you had all those guys, fellows that had worked in the sheep business, herders or lambers, or people that tended stock. They were available, and there was, like in the town of Dillon, there was what we called the cabbage patch. It was little cabins. Part of town, one whole part of town was called the cabbage patch, and it was just little one-room cabins. And we called them boomers, but they were guys that would work for a few months and get enough money saved, and then they'd go back to town and hang on until they could, and they'd survive for a while until they got hungry, and then they'd go back out and work again. There was a lot of those people out there, and people weren't afraid to work, of hard work when they did it. Right. Now, and that's really changed people, the available workforce, that they really don't want to work that hard physically anymore. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I would guess there's some advantages to a person having a bit of a lazy nature, in that they figure out how to do things smarter, not harder. But still, I try to encourage young people that there is some real satisfaction that comes from sweat. That, as I've gone through my career, some of the most satisfaction I got personally as a person came from physical hard work. Maybe I didn't accomplish it as much as I did sitting behind my desk making some major decisions and strategy and that sort of thing. But it was more satisfying to my person. But it kind of goes back to the working in the business or working on the business.
Yep. Well, and I think, like, in my own experience, a day of working on the business at a desk with spreadsheets, I'll walk away from that and my shoulders will be tensed up, and I'm, just kind of tense and really mentally kind of exhausted. You come in from a day of building fence or, throwing hay or whatever you were doing for a long period that day, and you're mentally kind of alive but physically shot. and I think that I am with you there as far as that, the satisfaction you get from the day of physical labor it's satisfying, whereas the mental labor can be kind of exhausting in a different way and not as satisfying. But
for me personally, that's how I made my career last as long as it did, and how I stayed productive and as effective as I was. It's because I learned how to balance those. I probably never was in the right spot exactly as far as the pendulum swings, but I knew for me personally, I needed to balance those. I still needed that part of me needed to be out there doing physical work amongst the guys, amongst the cows, amongst the land. A certain portion of my time needed to be there for me to be effective at going back and making those key decisions and strategies that could really affect my business. And that's one of the reasons in the 90s when we formed Coke Beef Company there in Wichita. I spent a month off and on back and forth to Wichita, one whole month out of 3 months of the summer, as we were reorganizing that company. And the company asked me to I was then the manager at the Beaverhead, and they asked me to take over all the ranches, to be over all the ranches. And I thought about it. It was quite an honor, but at the same time, I declined. And they really wanted me. I said, no, I don't want to. That would have required me and my family to move to Wichita, to town and to the office. And then I said I just didn't think I wanted to do that at all. And then they did throw out there that, well, we would be willing to let you try and do it from the ranch and do both. And finally, I just told them, my forte is in production agriculture. And that's what is a big part of me that drives me. And for me to go to an office and be effective, yeah, I could for a while, but it's not something that would sustain. And so I declined, and I don't regret that one iota. Because even then, we were starting to make some real major changes at the ranch level there, and then the improvement and changes that we made were exponential for the next 5 years there, and they wouldn't have if I had made that move.
Right. What part would you say that understanding yourself plays in kind of just managing people and managing employees and employee retention and making sure that you understand the people you're working with too, that you, on the same level that you understand yourself and what makes you tick, you also understand the people that you're bringing in and how they fit in to the place. What kind of a role does that play in that goal of keeping employees longer?
That's huge. And we some people, when they get in positions or roles of not so much authority, but high level of responsibility, some tend to quickly forget what it was like to be in the trenches. And that's a flaw in our system, to me, in that people are coming out of college that have never really been in the trenches, thinking that they're going to, and putting them in positions of authority and responsibility like that have never been in the trenches. It really hurts them in the long run, and it'll hurt the operation. And I think back to my own career. You can be in one too long to where you start stagnating in a position. But every position, when I made a change, I was at the ranch on the Cowboy crew. I was a gunsel on the Cowboy crew in October 1974. I was a new kid on the block. In late December of that same year, 3 months later, they asked me to go to Sage Creek and take on being the foreman up there, 80,000 acre place. I'd never hired anybody. Worked around plenty of people, but I'd never hired anybody. And I told them I didn't think I was ready for it. And whether I was or not, I was the best candidate at the time, and they wanted me to. And so I made plenty of mistakes, but I was there for about 11 years. And about 9 years, I was starting to get stagnant there, starting to look for other things and do other things. But and then they about 10 years, they wanted me to go over and be the cow foreman on the whole ranch. And I really didn't want to go do that because I thought it was going to cost me too dearly with my family. The time, because of the commitment you have to make. That was the biggest job of any job I've ever seen in my career. But anyway, I turned that down for 2 or 3 times, and they finally, told me, well, if you don't take it, you're probably not going to go anywhere in the company because we need you, and we put that training into you. We decided to go do it. Same token, I was cow foreman for 5 or 6 years, and when I come up to being, they wanted me to be the manager. I wasn't sure I was ready. There was things that I had not experienced yet that I thought I needed to go do that next job. And I'm glad I got that time to spend in each one of those positions, because it benefited everybody, not just me, but it really benefited our company, and it really benefited those future employees. I continued to make mistakes like everybody else at times in managing people. But thinking back to those times that I spent at Sage Creek, and, I was there for 10 years. Marion Cross, who was the manager at the time, he had been at Sage Creek for 10 years, 9 years before he became manager. When I looked back and started figuring out how to try and what we needed to do to change our way of managing people, I looked back what things worked, and then I looked back at the ones that had stayed. I'd been those long-term employees like Marion and I, or George Munsky, or Farm. Why had they stayed and others gone? And it really came down to those individuals were in a position of, they had a lot of responsibility. They had to make decisions on their own. They didn't have somebody that would come back behind them and fix their mistakes. They had to fix them themselves. But they were also in a position, and a lot of times for us, it was 60 miles away from anybody else in the company. You had to be resourceful, but you took on the attitude of an owner.
Yep.
And that's what brought longevity. But in order to get that attitude of an owner, you have to have certain levels of trust built in that you're going to make the right decisions. And it was just like I was just reading my daily reading in Proverbs today about not being a sluggard or slothful, and follow the ants.
Yeah.
Because whether there's somebody there or not, or a boss or somebody watching you, it's what you do on your own that you should be doing.
Yeah.
That creates, that reveals your character.
Yep.
And really, when you start, then that builds into selecting. When you start selecting people for different positions, you really, it used to be when we selected, when I first went there, and for a long time, and it's still that way in some operations, they select for skills. People select for skill. Like I can still remember our ranch in Texas at Matador, Texas. There, one of the key ingredients if you were applying for a job there on their Cowboy crew, you had to be able to weld. And part of it was because you they were rebuilding corrals at the time. They were trying to fix and establish facilities, and that's what you did when you weren't on a horse, was weld. But we were more into skills, selecting for skills instead of character, morals.
Yep.
Basic skills you can teach somebody. A skill is easy to teach, but how you are as a person, that's ingrained into you and taught into you at a very young age. And so skills became less of an important deal as we moved forward.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I was never very athletic, never on the varsity team of any school I was at other than Sunshine Bible Academy, where I went. We had 11 guys on a 9-man football team. One of them was a 7th grader and the other one was an 8th grader, and they ran our plays in and out on offense, and we'd play 48 minutes. The other guys played 48 minutes, and so there I got to play some varsity football. But we had some recruiters come to the school one time, and there was 2 of us that were seniors on the team. And they probably fudged a little bit on my weight in the program, said I was 150 pounds, and I probably didn't weigh that much. But the other guy that was a senior, he was like 320 pounds, and they might have fudged his weight a little the other direction because he was a big dude. And the recruiter came and he looked at us both, and I said, I'd love to come play football at your school or whatever, but I'm not the most athletic guy. I'll just be honest with you. He's like, we can teach you to be fast. We can teach you to catch a football. I can't teach anybody to be what that guy is. That you're born with. And so he said, we really want this guy, for sure. If we can only get one of you, we really want this guy. But I think that's kind of what you're talking about with the skills. We could teach you skills. We can teach you how to, have a better percentage in the branding pen. We can teach you some of those things. But character and morals, those things are kind of tough to teach when it's ingrained in somebody not to be those things, just in the way they were raised. And those things can be learned too, but it's an important thing to have as a foundation when you're getting started.
Yeah. It really, it comes down to what's more important, skills or values and beliefs. And there are those individuals out there that have both. They have the values and beliefs that fit what you want in an employee and a helper in your business, and also have some tremendous skills. But usually those people that have the right values and beliefs, they can learn new skills pretty rapidly and are always trying to improve their skills.
Yep. So what were some of the changes that you made? You said early on employee retention was like 6 months or less, maybe, or seasonal at best. What were some of the first changes you remember being made, or that you yourself made when you were in a management position that kind of started to move that in the right direction?
Well, we started kind of switching more to. We weren't relying as much on single guys, single crew, quite as much early on. And still, when I was Cal foreman, that was a big part of our crew, but partly because of the housing that we didn't have during the summer months, and we really improved. That was one of the first things, even though we still didn't have power at our camps. We did improve some of the housing compared to what it was, which wouldn't have had to been too much. But we made it a little more favorable for family men to be able to stay year-round there. That was one of the things. But I can still remember Clay as the cow foreman there. I'd been the cow foreman for four years or so. Around 88 or so, I still remember with tears in my eyes begging our manager, Marion, and our upper management at Wichita, sitting and begging them for help. Turn that around, because it was eating me up. And I'd watched other cow farmers before me that it eventually burned them out to where they left the cattle business completely. They went to running excavators, they were talented people, but it ate them up. It just overwhelmed them. And, some of them, it caused them to have family problems and the whole works. But at any rate, I begged them for help. They couldn't help me with the system that we had. They tried, and they tried to help us with our family, and Marion Cross really, I said before that I'd turned down going to the cow boss job 3 times, but that was because of my family, and he understood because he'd been there, and he raised 3 girls, and he committed to me. He says that he would help us all he could to make it work for our family, and he really did. He helped us. We got to move an old 1968 trailer that we'd gotten, the company had gotten secondhand out of the oil fields in North Dakota around Watford City to the Centennial, stuck it up there in the cow camp to where we'd have some place to live other than a camper trailer. And we drilled a well up there and put in a gravity flow water system and some propane lights to where we didn't have power, but we had some conveniences, to where, and that was a change, and we had to start somewhere, and later on, that was one of the things, especially when I took over as manager, one of the things I saw we needed to change. We needed to up the housing. If we were going to have long-time employees, we needed to improve the housing situation for our employees. The families had a decent place to live, and their life could be enjoyable. And I'll share with you, and I had it in the book, I think, but the first couple weeks after I became manager of the ranches, I met with some of the suits there in Wichita, and that was one of my key things that I told them. We got to turn this employee deal around. We got to retrain. We got to find some good people and retain them. And we got to start somewhere. And housing was one of the things lacking. So it was interesting. The first couple of weeks, I and my immediate supervisor, Bob Kilmer, who was a great guy, we went to talk to upper management. And anyway, I explained that to him, and we had a cow camp up to Jake where we kept it was a little old log cabin, 2 log cabins, and one was a cookhouse, and the other one was a small bunkhouse, and then we had travel trailers. We had 6 guys live up there to calve cows, in the spring of the year, and a cook. No power, no nothing. Outhouse, hand pump outside, for water. And told him we just got it. So the guy, he agreed. He says, "All right." He said, "Here's some list of modular homes that we can get." He says, "You guys go through that list. I'll give you a week." He charged Bob and I. He says, "I'll give you guys a week. You come back in a week with the plans. Which ones of these you want, and we're going to go put that stuff in and fix that stuff at the Jake." Okay, so we were getting close to a week, and Bob and I, among our other tasks and duties, we had kind of picked out kind of what we were thinking. And Bob called me one morning, and he says, "Ray," he says, "I got a little something's come up." And I said, "So what's up?" And he says, "Well," he says, "we were supposed to turn in this request for what kind of housing we want day after tomorrow. But," he says, "I just got a call from them, and they've changed their mind, and they want you to figure out how have no employees live on the entire ranch. They would maybe allow you to live on the ranch, but we want no employees living on the ranch. That'll solve all of our housing problems. That's how things can switch. Now, you can imagine, what am I getting into? This isn't a good start, but we hung in there, and that idea went by the wayside. And yes, we did. Eventually, we got housing improved, and even after I left, before I left and after I left, they continued to improve the housing to where it was a better place for people.
So you made some physical changes, infrastructure changes. You made some changes to, tools that were available to them as far as pickups and trailers and the houses they were living in. Were there other physical changes, or were the other changes more changes in the structure of the business? And
mostly the structure is what really made the change. But we had to have some of those infrastructure things in place before we could really make those changes, and those changes take time. That's one thing. I had a plan, I had a vision for where I wanted to go, but I knew that it was going to take some time, and that we had to have some basic things in place in order for it to happen. I still remember my cow foreman at the time, Gary Mills. I gave him a lot of credit because he helped me sit down, and we had on a big old cookhouse table. We just had big sheets of paper out there, and we figured out a flow how to divide the responsibilities of his cow boss job that he and I both had. That was gigantic. We figured out that we needed to divide that up, give those some more responsibility to more people. Take some of the burden off of him, but give some responsibility to other people, because that's what was going to take to retain those people. They needed an opportunity to make decisions. They weren't afraid of being held accountable, but they needed the opportunity to make decisions and see the fruit or the success or failure of those decisions and live with them, And then on top of that, then be rewarded if those decisions benefit the company.
Yeah.
And so that was a big key deal. But when we first launched into that, he couldn't do it. He couldn't turn loose of all that. And in some ways, I was the same way. There was things I didn't want to turn loose, and I'd been the cow boss, and then I was a general manager, so I was probably doing some things that I hadn't turned loose of. And but it's a transitional deal to where somebody's got to be doing them. And eventually you can get to where you turn those off, you go do something else that's more profitable and beneficial, and let them do that. But I still remember I was criticized pretty harshly by some folks in the company that when I first launched off into it, we just said, okay, we're going to take 4 guys from our crew, the best 4 guys that are situated for this, and they are going to be our new herd managers. And people said, you ain't got the right people. That ain't going to work. You don't have the right people. They just don't have the right skills. They just don't have. And I said, I'll grant you, we probably don't have the right people. But I said, if we wait till we have the right people, we'll never have them. This will go nowhere. We'll stay in a command-based system and have turnover just like we've always had. So we launched off into it, and those guys were good. They tried their heart out. Some of those realized I didn't have to. They realized that maybe they weren't situated for that.
Sure.
But eventually we got to the place where we did. And then there was a period of time where I went without a cow foreman, and we were trying to do that. I went without a cow foreman for more than a year, and I didn't even have a secretary in the office about the same time. So I was doing a lot, We were getting by, but I was trying. It was in a transitional period. And then Wichita stepped in and said, you need to have a cow foreman, you know. And so they injected me with one, and we went backwards for 2 years. He was really in command. He wanted power and command. And so we went backwards for a couple of years until in our progress towards being really transitioned into a market-based management system that we did never happened until he left. When he left, and the guys came to me and said, "What are we going to do now?" You know, I said, "We are going to launch off into exactly what we had planned to do and started to do two and a half years ago." And I said, "You guys are it, and we're going to just do it." And it worked very well. We had very few changes in all those years. In almost 15 or 18 years, we had very few changes in those herd managers.
And that's the transition you talk about in the book, and the transition that started on the cookhouse table was the transition from command-based management to market-based management.
Yep.
You've talked about the differences between them, but can you define those two terms for me a little bit?
Okay, even if you just look at them from if you put them out on a flow chart on a piece of paper, a command-based system is pretty vertical. Everybody reports back. Everything reports back to that one person. And a market-based management system is more horizontal. There still has to be that final answer. There's still got to be that final decision maker. You know, that somebody that really kind of makes sure that we're not losing track of our vision and the big stuff, but letting the little stuff go to those responsibilities go to others.
Yeah, day-to-day decisions.
There's a transition that needs to happen there. And for me, you know, as I think about that in today's world with other operations, as they're trying to make, if they were trying to make that transition, they need to understand it's going to take some time. But one of the places that we don't do a good job in general is, even if we got the selection part right for the employee, and as a simple analogy, or a horse, if we got the selection part right, we usually fail pretty badly in the development. And just like for me, I had the opportunity as cow foreman and then as manager in those first few years of my manager job, where I was hands-on, out with the guys all the time working, you know. So I was confident that the guys that we had working there were going to follow animal husbandry practices. They were going to have compassion for the animals and the land, a care for the animals and the land that fit with what I thought was right. So I kind of helped train that into them. And so I was comfortable with that. So I could turn loose to that, you know, later on. I knew that, you know, that the animals were going to be taken care of. They weren't going to be abused. You know, they weren't going to be roughed up. They were going to be handled in a good, humane manner, you know. And so I had that taken care of. But it takes a while to make sure you're there. Same way with safety. You know, with your people, it goes back to that ants deal that I was talking about in Proverbs. It's what them people are, and each one of us is going to do when nobody else is watching. It goes back to your character and what you really are. And when you hire and determine that those people have those qualities, then the sky is the limit as to what you can accomplish. It really is. And then one of the big things, of course, the structure, we had like 4 herd managers that had different parts of the ranch and different parts of the herd. We tried to keep because the herd transitioned from summer country to fall and winter and spring. There were some trade-offs in the herds, from one herd manager to the other, but we tried to keep them to a minimum if we could, so that they had the most effect. The decisions that they made and their care could have the most effect and measurable effect.
They got to see the results.
That's exact, and they could benefit from it.
Right.
And we could compensate them for it. And so that turned into a huge plus for us, is that incentive. And each one of those herd managers had one, maybe two, most of them just one support help that they had, permanent support help. So we literally went from that huge crew that we were talking about before. We had increased our acreage, we had increased our cow numbers, and we had around 7,100 cows at our peak when I was there, I think. And then we ran quite a few stockers and yearlings and stuff too. But 14 total people in the whole place, full-time people.
Wow.
14.
And they were not seasonal anymore. They weren't They weren't seasonal anymore either, right? They were there year round. And
Yep.
The hay crew and the cowboy crew.
The hay crew had gone away.
Okay.
The hay crew had gone away, and that was one of the things we did change in like 95, I think. I felt it very important that we be in control of the raising of our hay and the feeding of our hay. But the actual putting up of the hay, the actual farming and haying and swathing and that, we sold all of our equipment. That was one of the best things I ever did as a manager. I had an auction, and we sold a fleet of 4 or 5 of every farm implement ever needed. We sold in one day.
Yeah.
And we had, there at the time it was like 250,000 acre deal, maybe almost 7,000 cows. We had a couple old cats that we kept, one backhoe, and we kept one tractor, a 90 horse tractor with a loader on it. And then in the spring of the year, when we needed a couple more, maybe to feed, when we did feed some cows, we rented too for a couple months.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we contracted out all the farming, the physical farming, the swathing, the baling, the stacking.
Yep.
Farmed all that out.
If you ever go through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, at one point he'll get to the point where he says it's time for your plasectomy, and he says you got to pull out all your credit cards and cut them up. And I think that there's a lot of ranches that would probably benefit from a steelectomy.
Oh yeah, yeah. I see it all the time. I mean, and we were the first ones to do that. Of course, we'd done a number of things. We were kind of first in, but that was, a lot of people thought, what's this dumb sucker doing now? And I'd started doing. Come up with the idea of windrow grazing too, about some of the same time. And, it was about the same time they saw us leaving our beautiful second cutting windrows laying out there in the field and driving by. And what is the matter with them? They got all this machinery sitting there and they didn't put up their second cutting hay. What are they, in the bars or what? But it was a plan. And, now that turned into kind of a lot of people have done that since.
It's my favorite way to feed in the winter. I've done winter grazing, I've done bale grazing, and I've done windrow grazing, and that's my windrow grazing is my favorite.
It's amazing how that hay will store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we found, you had to pay attention to how the windrows were shaped, and we would rake 2 windrows together. Yep. Some rakes wouldn't put them in a good windrow. It's kind of like the old timers when they put up loose haystacks. They'd have somebody up on top to make sure it's shaped right. If we just made sure those windrows were shaped right, and not 2 windrows with a
valley in the middle,
a valley in between, that hay in March was just like the day we put it up in September.
Right. Yeah, and that timing, like you said, September, that's an important part of it too, putting it up that late. But, the guy I bought my place from here where I'm at in western South Dakota, he was talking about putting up loose haystacks one time, and he said he was up on top finishing the haystack, and his dad brought one last load of hay to him in the farmhand and dumped it on there and dumped 3 rattlesnakes up there with him, and he bailed off the top of that haystack, and his dad was yelling at him, "Get back up there and finish that haystack." When those rattlesnakes are gone, I will.
Yeah. But back to the incentive part, that really increased our production and profit, especially our profit, because and the longevity of those herd managers, because each one of our employees, part of our system then was each employee, regardless whether they were a herd manager or support helper, every employee had a written set of roles, responsibilities, and expectations. We called them RR&Es. And it was the first time we ever started trying to sit down and do those. And I've tried to help some other people since with that. And the normal thing that they'll do as an owner or as a manager to sit down and help somebody, the first thing they do is they start writing down tasks and how they want them accomplished. That's not what it's about. And that's why I said what I did about having spent that time training those guys to follow some good animal husbandry practices and land management practices. So where I was confident they were doing the right thing for the land, but how they did them wasn't my business, as long as I was sure that it was being done ethically and correctly that way. Then how they accomplished those tasks was their decision. And then the real meat of it was I could put in measurable goals and expectations. So I had so much data for so long, as to what this herd had done, and weaning weights, conception rates, and then pastures by how many AUMs we've harvested, those kind of things, and a big one, feed cost per cow. But I had all that in there, so we had some parameters that we could set up to go from, and kind of like basics. This is your basic expectation, and then we would incentivize those guys by saying, if you can accomplish what you want without having to tell somebody how to do it. Right. Just incentivize them for the right things, for the right outcome.
Well, and the truth of the matter is that you might not know how to do it. You aren't the smartest guy in the room all the time. And so sometimes this guy's going to, because he's out there every day, going to see something that you don't see and say, hey, if we just did this a little different, we probably could meet that goal.
That touches on something, Clay, that I realized shortly after I became general manager. And I'd been around Marion Cross. He was a great mentor to me. But one of the big switches and things that I realized that I intentionally made different from me than him and his generation of managers. Mm-hmm. And there's still people out there in family operations and other operations that still have this attitude that the general manager has to know. He has to be able to answer every question. He's got to know. If he don't know, he's not a good manager. That's crap. You can't store that much stuff in there. But I know where to go get the information or how to get it. Yep. Or seek out somebody that does have it. That was the big difference. And I never, ever figured that I had all the answers. Now, there would be people later on in my career, in my crew, that might question when they'd come to me with something and I'd say, no, we don't want to do that. And I try to explain why, but they thought that I was, just making a decision because I wanted to. What they didn't realize is we'd already been through that process, and we'd already learned that lesson. We didn't need to learn it again.
We've tried that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a farm foreman that wanted to go plow everything up again. We're compacting the soil, and we need to plow all these hay fields up and replant them. No, we've been there. We know what that does.
Yeah.
But at any rate, the incentive deal was it made it a very powerful tool for me, and was easy for me because I had all that data. So I knew what our baselines were, and then I could encourage those guys to say I'd have them, maintain body condition on the cow, and I'd have a expected conception rate on their herd of cows, and weaning percentage, maybe weaning weight. Weaning weight wasn't real big for me. It was more weaning percentage. That drove profit a lot more. But then the big one was feed cost. And if I could get them guys to maybe say in there that I want to make your responsibility is to maintain a body condition between 4 and 5 in those cows, and yet try and do it and reduce your feed cost, your non-grazeable feed cost by 2%. I knew what that would do for us as far as dollars. I could put it to dollars and cents. Same way with an increase in calf crop percentage, weanable calf crop percentage. I could, in 5 minutes time, I could figure out that brought us, this percentage over what was their expectation brought us $15,000 or $18,000 in just this one little herd, or $50,000 in one little herd. Then it's easy to figure out how to give them some compensation towards that. And it worked. I mean, it really worked. Them guys, they were kind of like the cows. We would challenge them, and give them the tools that they needed, but challenge them, and they would go out and get her done.
Yeah. And just having a challenge is an important part of it too. It's not, it can get, like you said, you can stagnate if you aren't being challenged. Was there,
and I wrote about it in my book, but towards the end of my career, I knew what was going to happen. We didn't, the company, when we had the Coke beef going, they were growing. There was plenty of opportunities and stuff, other opportunities outside the ranch. But then after we got disbanded the Coke beef deal, it was just the 3 ranches, and there was limited opportunities as to growth within the company, for those guys. And I recognized early on, some of these guys are going to be just like I was. They've been in these positions quite a long time. They're going to start stagnating, and a couple of them did, and so they kind of started cannibalizing towards one another. It's kind of like the old deal of circle of wagons and shoot in.
Yep.
And that's something you got to realize, that's a reality. It's going to happen unless a person is being challenged and growing. They're going to stagnate and not going to be happy.
Was there a specifying of the mission and vision that took place at all in that journey, or anything like that? Did you make it more specific, or I don't know how you want to say it, more concrete, more narrow, however you want to say it?
It was more understood because it was shared more. Early on when I was first there and while I was cow foreman, there wasn't a lot of vision shared. There wasn't. I mean, there wasn't. Literally, I was cow foreman for 3 years before I got to see a financial statement.
Wow.
that was just the way companies work and the way businesses work. There's plenty of family operations out here right now that I bet there's some of their kids that have worked in them places haven't seen the financial statement hardly.
Yep.
And they need to. That needs to be part of the transition and education. It's kind of like the Dave Ramsey deal there. There's people that are going through life that just don't have a clue.
Yep. Yeah.
I've had friends in my career. I've had friends and neighbors that have grown up that I watched, and I think of a family that they had 3 brothers, and their dad was the patriarch, and he started. Those 3 brothers never got to make a real decision on their own, and certainly not a financial decision until their dad died. And they were all close to 60 years old when that happened, and they didn't know how.
Yep.
It was a hard part.
Yep.
Hard transition. So it's just like I said before, and it's very similar. A ranch horse and an employee. That selection and development are key things to work on, and that's hard. I can still remember the first time when I was cow foreman, and I told you I was begging for help, and we were in Wichita, and we had some mentioned they were trying to help us kind of transition and be better managers, and we were transitioning into more towards a change in the way we managed the entire company. But they came in and told us, they said, you guys need to concentrate on selection and development. That's the most important thing you can do. Well, I was 4 guys short at the time, trying to get cows fed and cows calved, and it's kind of like, when you're up to your knees in alligators, that isn't the primary thing you're concerned about at the time. But they
take a warm body with a big stick.
Yeah, but they were right in the big picture. It was right. Yep. And I think even with our horses, the selection had to change as our crews changed. The kind of horses we had to select changed, and then the development of them, we spent more time developing them instead of just on the job training, which is what it used to be.
Yeah.
If you could get on them, it was your responsibility to get back home on them.
What was some of the development? What were some of the things that you did for employee development that worked and that moved that ball in the right direction?
Well, we did a lot of training. I took the guys and gals to anytime there was some kind of a seminar, or it might be on safety, it might be on nutrition, it might be on animal husbandry, on protocols for beef quality assurance, any of those kind of things. We took them. We just loaded them up and we went. Any chance we got. I wanted them learning and being exposed to something outside of just a hard day's work. So we exposed them to a lot of that. And probably in the latter years of my career, and as those guys got more experienced, we probably didn't do as much, because, and that was probably one of my failings. I probably I needed to keep being more aggressive towards increasing their knowledge and exposure, but it was what it was.
So what was the employee retention like when you were at the end of your career? You talked about 6 months or seasonal at best. What was it like at the end?
Okay, so I went back and figured it up when I took over as manager in 1990, fall of 1990. We had, I'd been there quite a while. We had a few employees that had been there some time, and our farm foreman had been there almost 30 years. But our average tenure when I was took over as manager was 2.5 years, and I'd been there, for 16, but it was 2.5 years. When I left, it was 11 years. Our average tenure on employees was 11 years.
Wow.
That to me was our biggest success.
Yeah.
It just really was for the company. Now, and it's digressed from there. It's digressing pretty rapidly. Fortunately, I'm proud to say that there's still a couple of the employees there at the ranch, even after it's sold now, that have been there over 30 years that I hired. Yeah.
Very good.
One other thing that I'd mention, when we talked about employees, like trying to give them leeway or opportunities to make decisions, and sometimes, like say when I was talking about the plowing deal, similar type deal. One of the things that is common, and I see common amongst people, is say you'll have somebody that'll come to the owner or the manager with an idea, and they'll just say, I think this is a good idea. We need to go do it. Well, fine. And I was that idea guy. I mean, that was probably one of the biggest pluses for me, is I'm an innovative kind of thinker and still am. But it's one thing to bring an idea and say, here, go do it. This is what we should do. It's another thing to bring that idea and say, okay, here's the pluses where we could, and show this. I've done enough research to show that we could gain this much advantage by doing this, and then, but this is the risk. So I would tell the guys, I said, I want you to keep bringing ideas. Let's try different things. But I said, bring data.
Yep.
That old deal, in God we trust, but everybody else bring data. That is a good business philosophy. It really is, because the data's out there. There's a lot of the data's out there.
Yeah. I've heard it said that amateurs bring ideas, professionals bring proposals. So yeah, it's been kind of interesting to me as I, through the years I watched throughout my career, and we did a lot of innovative things. We made some mistakes. We did some things, but most of them worked. But it's been interesting to me. Just for instance, the windrow grazing deal. There's three of us in different parts of the country that kind of came up with the idea and really tried it about the same time. And Greg Simon he was at the Deseret at the time. I didn't know him. And a fellow from up in Canada that I didn't know at the time. About the same time, same year, we all kind of launched off into the same kind of idea and did this. Well, we had done this 4 or 5 years, and kind of really at the ranch there, and man, it worked. At the college classes from MSU and Idaho State and University of Nevada, Reno, they'd come visit. I'd take them out there and show them what we'd done with windrow grazing and how it had affected the crop and the land and everything. And then, a year or so later, then the universities grab onto it, and they do all these studies of this and that, and it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's like their idea. And most of innovation does not come out of academia. They go back and validate it, but most innovation does not come out of academia. Right. Yep. Very good.
It comes out of a need.
Yeah.
Genuine need.
Right. Yep. That's what Gabe Brown talks about that. He said, after 4 years in a row of getting our crops hailed out, I was so broke I couldn't afford to put string in my baler. And so that was the first year of bale grazing. Was we just kicked the bales out and grazed them where they were. Yeah.
Now I'm still trying to struggle with that one, but I just see the windrow grazing as a better way of spreading those nutrients back to the ground, to me.
Yep.
But
yep, it's you cover a lot less ground with bale grazing. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It's very concentrated, and I think we made a mistake the first year we tried it. We didn't make them clean up enough. I think we left too much residue, and there was I think there's probably some kill under those spots.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that there's a right and a wrong way to bale graze for sure. And I think it is the fastest way to change ground, but it's a very slow process because it's such a concentrated area that you're doing it in. So,
Yeah.
Ray, is there anything else that really needs to be said as far as this employee management and employee retention piece, or do you think we've kind of covered it? I mean, there are lots of things we could talk about as far as what makes quality of life for employees better, from cow selection and those kinds of things. And that's just proof that everybody listening to this should own a copy of this book and probably having a couple extras to give away. But anything else major?
Probably the most major thing that I was thinking about this as far as your topic. I think, I talked about selection and development, but before you start selecting people, you need to know and be confident in what you're selecting for. There's a lot of people in our business now that they're just selecting for a laborer to fill in and do a labor, and not, in our situation, there was plenty of labor and stuff out there to be done, but I needed help. You get in a place that size, you got to have help. You can't run them things by yourself, and you don't want to, but there's a lot of people that all they want is labor, and they're hurting themselves, and they're hurting our society. Because I've had this conversation with somebody numerous times in the last couple of months. I have a genuine concern that about one more generation, we're not going to know how to provide our own food.
Yeah. Yep.
If you look back a few generations, that kind of changes in a few generations. We try to make it a little easier for the next generation, and we finally get to the point where we've made it so easy for them, they can't take care of themselves.
Yep.
I mean, obviously we were talking, before we started about, we got winter here this winter. It's finally, we're getting kind of an old normal winter, but, so, it's kind of off subject, but, as COVID came on, we've gotten a pretty good influx into Montana of people from other parts of the country. Oh. Want to get away from the big cities. And I don't blame them at all. But, man, there's something to be said about walking down the street in Sheridan, Montana, the 1st of December, and it's 18 degrees with a 20-mile-an-hour wind. And here comes this dude walking out of his car to the grocery store in shorts and flip-flops.
That's okay until something goes wrong. Then what?
When something goes wrong, that guy's in big trouble.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. And they don't think far enough out. They think, well, his thoughts are, I'm just going to go get what I want off the grocery store shelf. Well, the reality is it might not be on the shelf. And the real reality is if it ain't on the shelf, maybe it ain't available. And you're going to go hungry.
Right. Not to mention if you slide off the road on the way home and have to walk anywhere, you're in trouble as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of goes to what you're talking about, that when you hire somebody, you should be looking for somebody who is not just a back and a pair of hands, but also a mind. Somebody who can think for themselves and make a decision, make a good decision, and not have to call you on the phone and say, is this the right thing to do? Because in the reality also in that part of the world is calling on the phone isn't an option sometimes. And you're out there by yourself and you got to make a decision. And so a mind is an important thing.
It is so much. It's like a compounding effect. It really can be. It can be a compounding effect. You can get all the bases covered, but if you want to improve, you got to allow some people to to grow and to be challenged and to make decisions and learn from their decisions and help you make better ones.
Yep.
But on the same token, you all have to have a common goal or vision as to what you're striving for. And you need to make that big enough and general enough to where little things can fit in there or fall out and not change the outcome.
Yeah.
Safety was one of the big things where we really made a major change in our crew and our company was safety. And the safety deal was one of those that was driven from the top down. Our owners said, the biggest risk that you guys have out there for us selling these ranches is if you can't operate those business safely without hurting somebody. We want every employee to come home to his family at night healthy. And if we can't operate those businesses that way, we're going to get rid of them. And Koch, that came from Charles and David Koch themselves. And that was driven down, and they meant it. And they got rid of some companies. I mean, they did. And they would have gotten rid of the ranches if we couldn't do it. And we went through some processes that our peers would think we were nuts, to go through that crap. Yeah. But it wasn't crap.
Right.
And it really was a good process that helped in other ways, the way we managed our business and the way our employees looked at their jobs and their business. It really was good.
Very good, Ray. I really appreciate the time today. Any other things that you had that you were thinking about as far as this topic is concerned?
We've been overwhelmed with response for our book. Especially locally. I told you before that, I've been around long enough to know that generally you don't know much until you're at least 150 miles away from home. But the response locally for our book has been wonderful. We had a book signing in Dillon at the bookstore in October, and I signed 80 books there that one afternoon. But it's just been great, the response. We're learning about marketing books and all, and that's a whole different realm. That's not something that we'd ever done before. So, it's something new and for us too. But so we just did a promotional deal. It's going on today, I think, too. 3-day promotional deal where we're giving away ebooks free on this deal.
Wow.
Yesterday, in 1 day's time, there's been 1,500 downloads of that book. Wow. And we've sold other books along with it too. Cool. But the reason that we did that is so that we could get out into markets and to different people in our society that we can't just touch, from our own circle. Right. We wanted to spread that book out to other places. It's gone to Brazil. It's gone to quite a few, to Germany, Australia, Canada, Norway. I mean, just all over. So that's been gratifying. The other thing I would say is, for people that's watching, if you want to know more about what's going on with the book or what we've done, if they just go to raymarxer.com, that goes to our website. And then the other fun thing that I would encourage anybody that wants to is go to my Facebook page, Cowboy in a Corporate World Facebook page. And what I've done there to try and keep our circle kind of hooked, and then also to expand our circle, I've been writing a story a week that didn't make it into the book of ranch life there, and that has been absolutely fun. It'll probably end up in another book, but there's stories that need to be told, and it's just real life stories that just they kind of more further explain some of the things talked about in the book. and other human interest stories.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cowboy suffering.
Yeah, and those have been some good stories. I've appreciated some of the ones that I've been able to read there on the Facebook page. And links to all that will be in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/271. workingcows.net/271. There'll be links to the Cowboy in a Corporate World Facebook page. There'll be links to raymarxer.com, and this will be out in time, I think, for people to still get their hands on a copy for their Christmas purchasing responsibilities. So I would encourage people to do that as well.
That is one other thing that I would like to mention, Clay. We have been very pleasantly surprised with the shipping times through Amazon and these other places where we've been getting the book printed. The delivery and shipping has been very rapid and has gone extremely well. And like most any of the books that we ship from our website that we ship right from the house here, the delivery, Sue's got the delivery down to where, it's like 5 days, most anywhere in the United States. It took 10 days in Canada just this week, but
very nice.
It's been fun. We've had to order more books, even do it through our own website where we've been marketing to the local bookstores and stuff. We've been kind of surprised. We've been having to order more books by the case.
Glad to hear it. Yeah. Ray, thank you for your time today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you. Enjoy visiting with you, Clay.
Since 1922, Mystic Lubricants has been providing superior performance and protection for farmers who demand the most out of their equipment. Today, Mystic continues to develop products in real-world conditions that are specially formulated to meet the unique demands of your specialized machines. They provide advanced protection for engine longevity and are the choice of people who make a living working the land. Learn more about Mystic products at mysticlubes.com. That's MYSTIK lubes.com.
I said this in the intro of last week's episode. I'll say it again. There will be a change in the feed coming to the Working Cows podcast. So if you are not, and that would be right after the first year. So first episode in 2023 should be on a new feed. And so if you are not getting those as you have been getting them, you can always find them at workingcows.net. So that's going to be home base. Will continue to be home base for the Working Cows podcast. And if you run into an issue and they aren't showing up like you expect them to be, you can always find them at workingcows.net, and we'll try to keep them coming. Or we've been through this feed transition once before, and I think it went really smoothly. And so I think we can do it again, transitioning back to a new feed. So shouldn't notice any issues, I think. If you're subscribed through a podcatcher, it should continue to come to you. But if it doesn't, go back to the workingcows.net/home, workingcows.net home base, workingcows.net/subscribe, and you can get on with it there. So really trying to get a hold of Will Winter again, do another episode with him. But if that doesn't pan out, we will have another episode for you again real soon on the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.